Welcome to the FreeTruth Show.
Welcome indeed to the FreeTruth Show on These Changing Times Radio. We are live. I'm your host, Patrick Lynch, in southern England, in Dorset in southern England. Now, what's this show about? If you're just tuning in for the first time, screw the New World Order and all their satanic paedophile monsters. Screw the vaccines, screw the chemtrails, and standing up for liberty is what this show is about. Now, I've covered quite a few subjects, chemtrails mainly, and I've also covered the dangers of vaccines, the current financial takedown, which is very deliberate and very engineered. I've confronted one of the Rothschilds face to face and told them that we're not their slaves. And we know very well who runs the planet. It's the bankers. We know very well who's murdering people en masse, causing wars and funding wars. But what most people may not realize is that they have a control mechanism of their minions underneath the ranks, so to speak. And it's a very dark period in humanity's history. If we don't stand up now to these monsters, it's the end of humanity. If you want to be half bored, then you're very welcome to carry on into the future if they allow you to be born. One of the subjects I haven't covered as much is their sexual practices and their cover-ups of those sexual practices and the abuse of children, innocent children, across the planet. This is their thing, and my guest this evening is Robert Greig, who's done a fantastic job exposing these criminals, sick criminals. Are you with us, Mr. Robert Greig?
Hello. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much, Patrick.
Welcome to the FreeTruth Show.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on air again. It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, it's my unfortunate pleasure to bring you on with the greatest of respect. But the story you have to tell is harrowing, so we make no apologies. The truth has to be told. And I was a bit concerned that this story was waning a little bit, and I brought you on to give it an extra boost because it's the tip of the iceberg. We know that people have suffered, and I'd like to help as much as I can in bringing that awareness to the public. And now, what we spoke about earlier before the show today was that although I'm familiar with the story, I would like you to take the floor. I know you're well used to the microphone, and explain to the public listening and the YouTube listeners afterwards and across the net, hopefully across the world. It'll add to the uncovering of this, not many other words for it, demonic practice. Where to begin, I wouldn't know. I'm going to leave that to you. So, Mr. Robert Greig, you have the floor. Take it away.
Thank you very much indeed, Patrick. And of course, if you want to interject at any time, bring up any points that you're not sure of, please do so. It's perfectly all right in order to do so. Now, what I would say, first of all, is one good thing I have to say is the story is not on the wane, I'm pleased to say, particularly thanks to the fact that we now have hooked in the First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond, who's responsible, one of those responsible for covering up the story. It's given great impetus since we had a headline story about 2.5 weeks ago, which I'll tell you more about in due course. Now, amongst the people who are listening tonight, I suspect there are a number of people who know a lot about the HOLLIE GREIG case. That is the name of the case, the name of the young woman with Down syndrome who was brutally raped and tortured by a gang in Aberdeen and has been the victim of rapes since the age of 6. And there are people listening tonight who know something about the case, but probably not everything. and I suspect there are some people who are entirely new to this case. So the people who know a lot about it, the people who know something about it, if they just forgive me a little while, just to sort of go over the basics of the story. It's a very complex story, and it's very difficult to be brief, but I'll do the very best I can. What I will say at the outset, that this is a story that is almost beyond belief. The horror of what has happened to Hollie and other children is sickening and horrifying enough in itself, but it's certainly not unique, and there have been other awful cases around the world, and certainly in Britain, I'm sorry to say. But what is particularly staggering about this case, and which people find the greatest difficulty in, is the sheer lengths in which the government, particularly in Scotland, have gone to, but not exclusively in Scotland, but mainly in Scotland, have gone to actually cover this case. And it goes right to the top of the First Minister, Alex Salmond, as I alluded to a little earlier. Now, I came into the story in the autumn of 2008, so we're talking about nearly 3 years ago. I got into people often ask how I came into it. All the crimes and atrocities took place in Aberdeen, in Scotland, and I live in Cheshire. And people, what's a chap living in Cheshire got to do? How did he become involved in some investigating crimes in Aberdeen? Well, the reason for that is as a result of another case I was dealing with, which it is a very high-profile case as well, involving fraud in the travel and international airline industries, and the bribery of senior officers in the Metropolitan Police Fraud Squad. The early stages of that were covered by ITV in a documentary. Certainly, the story developed enormously since the documentary was made, but it did perhaps give people a little bit of fact that that there are some serious stories out there, and it perhaps helped me to get a little bit of a name in a very, very minor way. Anyway, as a result of this, I was invited to give a speech in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in October 2008, about the case that I've just talked about, and I did so. And after the meeting, one of the organisers, a very loyal and patriot Scot called Stuart Usher, approached me and said, "Robert, thank you for coming along and all the rest of it, and you've done a good job against all the odds in your case in London. But there's an awful case I'd like to tell you about two poor Scottish ladies who had to flee the country, flee their home city, to go and flee to England, to Shropshire, to avoid some terrible crimes that had been committed against the daughter. And if there's anything that you can do to help, we'd be most grateful. It's probably going to be the most horrible story that you've ever heard, but if you could just talk to the people, the poor ladies concerned who've been trying to help for some years, it might be very helpful." He said it wouldn't be any point in giving it to someone in Scotland, an investigator in Scotland, because of the brutality of the Scottish police state. It is a police state, there's no doubt about that. Anyone who tried to take the case on in Scotland would have been crushed very early on in their investigations. There's no question about that. And I think as I talk about the problem, you'll see what happened to me living in England, how I've been attacked and persecuted. But it would have been far, far worse had I lived under Scottish law. At least I'm protected to a certain extent under English law, and that is very important. Anyway, I was very wrapped up in the case I told you about in London at the time with the Metropolitan Police and all the rest of it, and I felt that it might be very difficult for me to spare the time and to do justice to the case. But Stuart, who's I have a great deal of admiration for, persuaded me to speak to the lady concerned. Her name was Anne Greig, was the mother. The daughter was Hollie Greig. And I phoned them up one day, and I spoke to Anne for about 2 hours. And when I came off the phone, I was enormously impressed by the courage and dignity of this lady. And I said, "Well, I have to see your documents. Have you got some documents to back up everything that you're alleging?" And she says, "Yes, I've kept everything, and you're very welcome to come and see them." So I said, "Well, I need all that. I'll need to have a look at it before I can promise to take on the case. I'd like to help you. I've got a lot of other work on, but I'll do the very best I can. I think you're a sincere person. If what you can show me is sufficient for me to get going on the investigation, I will do. because what I hate to do and what I would never do is to lead people into the fact that perhaps I would start an investigation and there may not be enough evidence there to carry it on, and all you're doing is building up people's hopes and hurting them even further if they had a dreadful experience. But when I spoke to Anne and to her daughter Hollie and saw the documentation, I realized this was almost an unparalleled case. I could see already there'd been an absolutely gigantic and monstrous cover-up by the authorities. Now, that's the background to how I became involved in it, but I'll tell you about the case as it stands. HOLLIE GREIG is now aged 31, and she has Down syndrome. But she is a competent person. She's the police and the specialists have all agreed that she's a competent witness. And as is the case with people who have Down syndrome, for those of you who don't know about the condition, and I certainly didn't know anything about it until I met Hollie, people with Down syndrome, as long as they are competent, have a fantastic memory. They can remember things that happened years and years and years ago in great detail as if it's happening today. Now, obviously, that's a great advantage as far as being a witness is concerned, or perhaps in other aspects. But if those memories are of the most brutal sexual assaults imaginable, you can actually understand how terrifying that is, and that remains the case for someone like Hollie. The story unfolds as follows. When Hollie was 20 years old and living in Aberdeen with her mother and her father and her brother, there was an altercation in the family. The father was quite a violent man. Anne Greig had already been put in hospital after her husband had attacked her by hitting her over the head with a vacuum cleaner at one point. She was put in hospital, so it was known that the father was a violent man. But obviously Anne had no idea about what had been happening to her daughter until one day there was an altercation. The father threatened to kill Hollie's dog. Hollie loved her dog, and Anne and Hollie escaped from the house, but Hollie said she had to go back because her father said that if she said anything or if they ran away, he would kill the dog. So, of course, Anne sort of said, well, no, of course he's not going to kill the dog, Hollie. You know, he's angry with Mummy, but he's not angry with the dog. And Hollie said, no, he's going to kill Max. The dog was called Max. He's going to kill Max. So Anne actually then started to say, well, no, of course he won't kill her. And then Hollie finally broke. What she had to say was something that is, you can imagine how a mother would feel with a daughter telling her this. And Hollie started to tell her mother how her father and then later her brother had started sexually abusing her from the age of 6. So you can then imagine just how that would. It's hard to imagine the shock that a mother would face on that. But I think we can all agree it's just about the most horrible thing that anyone could possibly hear. So, of course, Anne found this very difficult to believe, as anybody would be, and she said she knew Hollie was a very truthful girl, and people with Down syndrome do tend to be very truthful. They don't tend to have the sort of capacity other people might have to embellish things or to fantasize over things. They tend to say things as they really are. And eventually, of course, she accepted what Hollie had said. No, Mummy, I'm telling the truth. I'm not telling you lies. This is what happened. So, of course, Anne then arranged to go to the police station. And Hollie gave the evidence. It was in May 2000. And Hollie was telling her mother all about this, what was going on and all the rest of it. And reported it to the police. Now, the police didn't do very much about this, which was rather surprising, and they talked to the father, but nothing happened. And so a few months went by. And again, I must just go back to the condition of Down syndrome, in that those who have the condition tend to not perhaps have the same grasp of intangibles that other people might have. And perhaps the most obvious example of this is time. They don't tend to see things in time the way that other people tend to do. And they don't always give all the information all at one time. They give things at different times. And in fact, Hollie, even at this stage, is still giving us more evidence that we didn't know about before. But what happened about 3 months after Hannah had first found out about this, and of course she and Hollie had moved away from the father and the brother by this time, was that in August of 2000, Hollie started to speak again. And you would think it's bad enough to hear that your disabled daughter has been abused by her own father and her own brother, but what Hollie came up with next was something that was, if anything, even more staggering, because she told her mother that not only had it been her father and brother, but her father had shared her with a group of paedophiles operating in Aberdeen. These people were all very high profile. It involved a sheriff, or a judge as known in England and the USA and most parts of the world, a leading police officer, a head teacher, a bank manager, and amongst other professionals, two people from social services, two carers, one of which was Hollie's own carer. And I have to say, in this gang, there were just almost as many women as there were men. This isn't just a group of sort of nasty, perverted men. Women, there are quite a lot of women involved in the gang as well, which I have to say, me knowing nothing about these things, came as a total shock to me. I just didn't think that happened, but it has. And then Anne took, having got now all the people were identified and knew who they were because they were friends of her husband, and obviously Anne and Hollie gave all the names. The following day, they were asked to go to the police station in Aberdeen, and of course phoned the police and said, I told you about my husband and my son. Now Hollie has come up with a lot of other names. There's obviously a very bad ring of child abusers operating in Aberdeen. Can we arrange to come and see you? And the following day, the 25th of August 2000, Anne and Hollie went to the police station, and the interviews took place, and Hollie provided the names of the other people in the gang. Now, of course, Anne didn't know what to expect, but she thought that having Hollie gone through the ordeals of twice going to the police station and now giving father, brother, and now a number of other people in the gang, another 14 people, that things would, in fact, an investigation would start to be undertaken, especially with the people being clearly identified. That wasn't the case, and this is where you can see from the start how things were, the tremendous efforts that have gone on to cover up for these high-profile abusers. Because just 10, 11 days later, on the 5th of September, in the flat that Hollie and Anne occupied, their place of refuge, suddenly a group of 10 people turned up and said that they were going to section Anne, to take her, to drag her off to the local mental hospital. Anne had never had any serious problems with the mental health whatsoever, but the group actually got hold of her in front of neighbours and in front of Hollie, who was absolutely screaming in terror, pulled her pants down, injected her with a needle in the buttock, and then threw her into a van and took her off to the local mental hospital, which sounds like something from Stalin's Russia, doesn't it, or Hitler's Nazi Germany, but it happened in Scotland. Meanwhile, Hollie, who was in complete terror, was handed back for a short time to her abuser father by the authorities, by social services. Now, fortunately, Anne, despite the dreadful position that she was in, and obviously her main worry was about Hollie, managed to very skillfully managed to get herself out of hospital in the following few days. And what she did then was she contacted her solicitor, and her solicitor explained what had happened. Her solicitor got in touch with a very eminent psychologist, Dr. Margaret Smith, and Anne went to Dr. Smith, and Dr. Smith gave her a full examination to see whether there's any problems at all. And I have to say the hospital, the doctor in charge at the hospital there Anne was taken was a man called Dr. Alistair Palin, and his first diagnosis was that Anne was schizophrenic. Now, having gone to Dr. Smith couldn't find any evidence of that kind of condition at all. Obviously, Anne was very seriously traumatized by everything that would happen, and so would anybody else be. But there was, she could see no reason at all really why Anne would have to be dealt with in such a draconian manner. And consequently, with the help of the solicitor and with Dr. Smith's testimony, even Dr. Palin at the mental hospital had to sign Anne off just a few weeks later and say there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. This is a supposedly eminent qualified doctor who once says someone's got schizophrenic and then 5 weeks later says there's nothing wrong with her. Obviously, it's quite clear that the reason that Anne was sectioned was to shut her up and silence her, to get Hollie away from her so that the social services people who've been involved in the rapes could hand her back to her father, who was part of the ring. As I think already you probably see that this is a story that almost sounds too incredible to be true. And I think if people, a writer of fiction, were to set it in what's supposed to be a civilized Western country, you would say, no, that can't happen. There are probably countries in the world where it might happen, but not in Scotland, not in the United Kingdom. Things like that can't possibly happen, but they have, and worse was to follow. Now, a little later on in 2001, Hollie made another revelation, which was also shocking and which has a great deal of significance at this present time. And she told her mother that, what I should say is that Anne had a brother called Robert David Greig. He was known as Roy in the family. Anne's father died when she was quite young. She was 11. And Roy, who was about 6 years older and a very responsible and kind person, sort of took Anne under his wing, tended to look after her. And when she was married and when she had 2 children, he was very, very kind to the 2 children, the son and the daughter, Hollie. And Hollie, particularly with having Down syndrome, he was devoted to her and was extremely kind to her in every way. And they loved each other very much indeed. He was a really good uncle and, by all accounts, a very good man. Now, what happened was that in 1997, and this is 3 years before Hollie told her mother about what had happened, something tragic and totally unexpected and virtually unexplained happened. Roy Greig, who was aged 53, in good health, had no worries. He was a bachelor, but had a pleasant life. He used to enjoy talking to his pals and like sport and all the rest of it. Was found in a stationary burning car on the outskirts of Aberdeen, well, on a sort of very isolated road near a village called Balmeady, just outside Aberdeen. There was no reason why he should have died in that way. The police and the pathologist and the investigators and the fire service all came along, and they regarded it as an unexplained death. But it was, in a way, inferred that they thought it was probably suicide. Now, of course, Anne really couldn't understand this and was very unhappy about it and said, well, I can't see any reason why he would have committed suicide. As far as I know, he had no serious worries. He was preparing and had arranged Hollie's 18th birthday, which was to take place 6 days after he died. That was his main thing. He loved Hollie. I could not see any reason why he would have taken his life. And, of course, the other factor is that he died in a fire in a stationary car, and I think the experts will tell you that it is very, very unusual for anyone to commit suicide by fire. It's just too painful. You might get the odd political activist or someone who has perhaps serious mental problems that might make them do things like that. But generally speaking, if people are going to end their own lives, they tend to do it in a less painful way than dying by fire. So every indication at the time, when something like that happens, the general view of the police, wherever you may go, is it's probably due to foul play. If it's not an accident, there's no reason to see it was an accident. It would almost certainly be foul play. But this was not the view taken by the Scottish police or the fire service or the pathologist. What made things even more suspicious from Anne's point of view was that they refused to let her have a copy of the autopsy, even though she was the next of kin. They refused to let her have it, and that troubled her at the time. She couldn't really understand it, and she couldn't understand why no proper investigation or inquest had been undertaken on account of her brother's death. Now, this leads up to Hollie's statement in 2001, because Hollie told her mother one day that her father had been caught accidentally by her uncle walking in and saw Hollie's father, raping her. And Anne, of course, was once again, had to face this appalling piece of information, and said to Hollie, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" And Hollie said, "Oh yes." And she said to her mother, "What did Uncle Roy said to Daddy?" And she said, "Uncle Roy said to Daddy, 'Don't touch Hollie. Don't you touch her. Don't you ever touch her again.'" And then Anne asked Hollie what her father had said to her Uncle Roy, and the father had said, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to have you killed." Working back chronologically, because obviously there's this difficulty with people who have Down syndrome, Anne worked out that the time in which her brother had caught Hollie's father abusing her in that way must have only been a very short time before Roy died. So,
Mr. Green,
yes.
Just a quick note to our listeners: we're going to have a call in later. For call-in questions, please call the toll-free number 877-639-5611 for your questions for Mr. Robert Green on this matter only. I'll only be taking calls on this subject alone this evening. So if you call in on a completely different subject and go off the rails, I will cut you off. It's 877-639-5611. No offence. Mr. Green, we're just going to take a quick break, a quick music break, if that's okay with yourself.
That's fine. Oh, you call me Robert, by the way.
Of course, yes. You are listening to the FreeTruth Show, everyone, on These Changing Times Radio with our guest, Robert Green, speaking about the Hollie Greig case. And we'll be right back after this music from Payday Monsanto, Pigs Gone Wild.
Okay, but you still have to show me your ID. I'm a uniform police officer. I have a license. What's your first name?
Sometimes I want it all. I can't decide. I'm trying to say no things. Since I was trained to bash your head against the wall. When you address me, always start with kings. Why are these civilians trying to walk before they crawl?
It's a conundrum. Beat the shit out of you and arrest you just for lunging. Even though you didn't, they call me Crash Man. I got a mechanism to shut off the dash cam. Disrespect me, son, you're in a world of hurt. And if she's in the area, even your girl gets hurt. Guaranteed to get your suckers on some queer shit. Somebody call the cops. I'm already here, bitch. Disregard the writing on my squad car. The only thing I'm protecting and serving is the oligarch. Handle my weapon the minute I'm out the car. That's your dog? Fuck him, he ain't allowed to bark. All this talk about a new world order being a bad thing, I am an adamant supporter.
You are listening to the FreeTruth Show on These Changing Times Radio. I am your host, Patrick Lynch, with our guest, Robert Green, who's in England like myself at the moment. We are live. We'll be taking questions from the chat box a bit later on, and you can call in on a toll-free number also, which is 877-639-5611. The toll-free call-in number is 877-639-5611 if you'd like to put questions to Robert Green. Are you with us, sir?
Yes, I am. And I think we were just talking there about the time that Anne had discovered from Hollie that it would seem almost certain that her brother is likely to have been murdered to silence him as he was a witness to one of the assaults.
So please continue. Please continue.
Yes, sure, yes. Now, there's another aspect that Hollie told her mother about, which another horrifying part of the story. And during the course of Hollie giving this information in 2000 and 2001, Hollie also told her mother that she had actually witnessed 7 other children, no fewer than 7 other children, also being assaulted and tortured and brutalized by the group. She identified all the 7 children, and the children were all children of the various members of the gang. And horrifying though it may sound, it was quite clear that the group were sharing their own children with them for their perverted sexual pleasures. It sounds just too sickening to be true, and I'm sorry if people perhaps are appalled by this, and it does tend to horrify you when you've heard it for the first time. Horrifies me now, even though I talk about it for the 100th or 1,000th time since I've been dealing with this case. But that is exactly what happened.